I'm Alex Foster. I'm 32 years old, and my own father publicly called a year of my life's work garbage before hitting the delete key in front of my entire department. Before I tell you how that single, arrogant keystroke ended up costing him his company and making me a partner at his biggest competitor, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Alright, let's set the stage. To truly understand the final, deafening explosion, you have to see the fuse being laid, inch by painful inch, over the course of one long year. It all started with a decision that felt both like a homecoming and a fool's errand. I agreed to join the family business, Foster Analytics. It has a nice, solid ring to it, doesn't it? My uncle, Robert Vance, was the CEO, a man I respected immensely. But the division I was joining, the one that desperately needed help, was run by none other than my father, Richard Foster. I was brought on as a client relationship coordinator. The title was a corporate mouthful, but the mission was simple. Stop the bleeding. Keep the clients happy. The problem was, the position seemed cursed. The guy I was hired to replace, a man named Tom, had lasted all of 4 months. The company was hemorrhaging accounts at a rate that was making the entire C-suite nervous. My father's solution, however, never changed. It was his mantra, his gospel. More calls, less time on each call, and for God's sake, stick to the script. On my first day, he didn't walk me around or introduce me to the team. He walked me to a small, gray cubicle, dropped a stack of client files on the desk with a heavy thud, and said, "Here, these are your accounts. Don't lose them." That was it. My grand welcome. I spent that entire first day, and the next, just reading. The files were a depressing monument to impersonal, robotic business. Every communication log was a sterile exchange of data points and contract clauses. Call logs meticulously noted duration down to the second, and I saw that anything over a 15-minute threshold was automatically flagged in bright red digital ink with the note, "Inefficient." There was zero humanity in these pages. It was like reading the diary of a particularly boring machine. These clients weren't people with businesses and families and problems. They were account numbers. They were revenue streams to be squeezed. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was the core of the rot. This wasn't a sales problem or a product problem. It was a human problem. My father saw business as a series of transactions. I saw it as a network of relationships. This fundamental difference in philosophy wasn't just a minor disagreement we could debate over Sunday dinner. I didn't know it then, but it was a hairline crack in the foundation of our family, and the pressure was building to a point where the whole house was destined to come down. That first week, sitting in that soulless gray box, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to be the next Tom, burning out in 4 months. I was going to do this my way. I was going to treat these account numbers like the actual, living, breathing human beings they were. I had no idea that this simple decision, this small, quiet act of professional rebellion, would set me on a collision course with my own father. A crash that would be more public, more brutal, and ultimately more liberating than I could ever have imagined. The first test of that new resolve came a lot sooner than I expected. My first real test came in my second week, a trial by fire disguised as a routine follow-up call. I was assigned the file for a man named Mr. Henderson, a longtime client who ran a mid-sized logistics company out of Ohio. His account was plastered with red flags. The official designation was at risk for non-renewal. The notes in his file, written in my father's clipped, impersonal style, were blunt. Client unresponsive to standard email follow-ups. Unlikely to renew contract. Propose offering a 10% loyalty discount as a final attempt to retain. It was a cookie-cutter solution for a human problem. My father's training echoed in my head as I dialed the number. Get in. Confirm the data. Present the approved offer. Get out. 15 minutes. Alex. Efficiency is king. I pulled up Mr. Henderson's digital file while the phone rang. It was a desert of data points. But as I scrolled, a tiny detail buried deep in the initial onboarding notes from 5 years ago caught my eye. It was a single, stray comment, probably from a long-gone sales rep. Client is a widower. Lives with his golden retriever. Buddy. It was nothing. A piece of useless, sentimental data to my father. To me, it was the only human thing in the entire file. It was an opening. The call started as expected. Mr. Henderson's voice was clipped, professional, and tinged with annoyance. He clearly wanted to get this over with. We went through the business talk, the data points, the perfunctory check-in. I could feel him getting ready to end the call. "Mr. Henderson," I said, taking a leap of faith, "this is a bit random, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but I was looking through your file and saw a note from a few years back. It mentioned you have a golden retriever named Buddy. I'm a dog person myself. How's he doing?" The line went completely silent. For a solid 5 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of my computer. My stomach tightened into a knot. I'd blown it. I crossed the line and he was going to hang up. Then his voice came back, but it was different. The hard, professional edge had melted away, replaced by something softer, warmer. "Buddy?" he said, as if surprised to hear the name. He's getting on in years now. We had a real scare last month. The vet thought it was his hips. Turned out to be a nasty infection, but he's on the mend." And just like that, the floodgates opened. For the next 30 minutes, Mr. Henderson didn't talk about contracts or analytics or service-level agreements. He talked about his dog. He told me that Buddy was the last living link to his late wife, that she'd picked him out as a puppy. He told me about their morning walks in the park, about the ridiculous cost of veterinary medicine, and about the profound worry that kept him up at night. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't try to sell him anything. I just listened. I listened like a human being. At the end of the call, just before we hung up, his voice was full of a genuine warmth that wasn't there before. "You know, Alex," he said, "I've been a client here for 5 years. You're the first person who's ever asked me about my dog. The very first." He paused. "Send over the renewal paperwork. And don't worry about that discount. We're good." I hung up the phone feeling 10 feet tall. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I had saved an at-risk account not by following the script, but by throwing it away. I logged the call, noting the outcome. The system automatically recorded the duration. 47 minutes and 18 seconds. A huge, glaring red flag. Less than 10 minutes later, my father was standing over my desk. He held a freshly printed copy of the call log, the 47:18 highlighted as if it were a crime scene. His face was a thundercloud. 47 minutes? He hissed, keeping his voice low so the entire office wouldn't hear, though his fury was radiating off him in waves. "What in God's name could you possibly have to talk about with a client for 47 minutes? "I was building a relationship, Dad," I said, my earlier confidence beginning to waver under his intense glare. Mr. Henderson renewed. "A full price. He was about to leave us. I don't care if he signed over his entire company in perpetuity," he shot back, his voice a venomous whisper. "Your job is about efficiency, about volume. You could have made 3, maybe 4 calls in that time. This is not how we do business here. This is a waste of time, a waste of payroll. Don't let it happen again." He crumpled the paper in his fist, tossed it into my trash can, and stalked back to his glass-walled office, leaving me feeling like a 10-year-old who'd been publicly shamed. That evening, as I was packing up, a quiet message popped up on my internal chat system. It was from Sarah Chun, a young, brilliant data analyst who sat a few cubes down. She was quiet, observant, and had been there for about a year. "Sarah, I saw that. Don't let him get to you. The guy before you, Tom? He tried to do things the right way. He burned out trying to be a robot. What you did with Henderson, that was good. Just wanted you to know." Her message was a small, unexpected lifeline in a sea of disapproval. I typed back a simple, "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that." It felt good to know I wasn't entirely insane, that someone else saw the value in what I was trying to do. She became my quiet ally, my secret sounding board in the months that followed. The real battlefield, however, wasn't always the office. Often it was the family dinner table. Every Sunday we'd gather at my parents' house. It was a standing command performance. My older brother, Leo, would be there, effortlessly soaking up my parents' praise like a sponge. Leo worked in the finance department at the company, a world of clean spreadsheets, hard numbers, and predictable outcomes. A world my father understood and revered. Leo closed the quarter 5% above projection. My father would announce, beaming with pride as he carved the Sunday roast. "That's my boy. No nonsense, no fluff. Just results you can bank on." My mother, Eleanor, would chime in on cue. "Oh, Richard. He gets his wonderful head for numbers directly from you." She wasn't a malicious person, my mother, but she was a world-class enabler. Her primary function in the family was to maintain a fragile, artificial peace, which usually meant siding with my father, smoothing over his rough edges, and gently nudging me back into line. Her unspoken mantra was, "Don't rock the boat, Alex." That Sunday, after the Henderson call, I tried to share my own small victory. "I managed to save the Henderson account this week," I mentioned as the potatoes were being passed. It was flagged for non-renewal, but I turned it around. My father didn't even look up from his plate. "The one you spent nearly an hour gossiping on the phone with?" Leo, my brother, smirked from across the table. "An hour? Wow, little brother. You must have been giving him the hard sell. What did you have to give away to keep him?" "Nothing," I said, my voice immediately defensive. In fact, he turned down the discount. I was just talking to him, getting to know him. Turns out the personal touch works. My client retention rate is already up 15% this quarter. A 15% anomaly. My father corrected, his tone dismissive. "It's not a sustainable or scalable model. You're creating bad habits, Alex. You get them used to these long, chatty, hand-holding calls, and you're setting a precedent we can't maintain across the board. Focus on the metrics. That's where the real value lies." My mother, seeing my face fall, quickly intervened. "Who wants more dessert?" "I made apple pie," she said with forced brightness. "Leo, tell us all about that new condo you're looking at downtown." I just sat there, pushing my food around my plate, feeling like a ghost at the table. It didn't matter what results I produced. In my father's black and white world, if it couldn't be quantified on his rigid terms, it simply didn't exist. My success was an anomaly. My method an inefficiency. Leo's predictable, sterile spreadsheets were real value. This became the suffocating pattern of my life. I'd go to work, actively ignore the company-wide memos from my father about optimizing call duration, and just connect with people. I sent a client in Seattle a link to a good dog trainer for their new rescue puppy. I sent another in Florida a condolence card when her mother passed away. I remembered birthdays. I remembered business anniversaries. I remembered the names of their kids and where they were applying to college. And my numbers, the very metrics my father worshipped, kept climbing. My client satisfaction scores skyrocketed, becoming the highest in the department by a wide margin. The trickle of clients specifically requesting to be transferred to my portfolio became a steady, undeniable stream. But with every success, every positive outcome, my father's disapproval and resentment grew. He'd pull me into his office for weekly reviews that were really just thinly veiled interrogations. "Why was your call with Omnicorp 35 minutes? Their data transfer was seamless. Their CEO's daughter just got into her first choice college, NYU. He was thrilled. We talked about it for a few minutes." "And how exactly?" he would ask, leaning over his desk. "Does that benefit our bottom line, Alex?" Because now he sees us as a trusted partner, not just another vendor. I'd argue, my own frustration mounting with each of these encounters. He sees us as people who actually care. My father would just shake his head, a look of profound, weary disappointment on his face, a look he had perfected over my lifetime. "That's sentimental nonsense, son. This is a business, not a coffee klatch. Tighten it up. Be more professional." The more I succeeded, the more he tried to force me back into his suffocating box. It was like he couldn't stand the idea that a method so alien to his own could possibly work. It wasn't just a disagreement about business strategy anymore. It was a personal affront to his entire identity, to his 30 years of doing things one way. So I started documenting everything. Every personal conversation, every little detail I remembered, every positive email, I logged it. Not in the official company system where he could dismiss it, but in my own private, encrypted database. I started building a document I titled the Value Proposition Analysis. I was determined to prove, in his own cold, hard language of numbers and data, that my sentimental nonsense was generating real, tangible revenue. I was building a case, not just for my methods, but for my own sanity and self-worth. I thought if I could just gather enough evidence, if I could present him with an ironclad, undeniable argument, he would finally have to see. He would finally have to acknowledge that I wasn't just his screw-up son playing around. He would finally have to respect me. I was so naive. I thought I was preparing for a logical debate. I had no idea I was actually gathering evidence for my own public trial. And my father wasn't preparing to be the prosecutor. He was preparing to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The tipping point arrived about 10 months into my tenure, on a crisp autumn day. The company held its semi-annual leadership summit, a mandatory event where all the department heads, VPs, and C-suite executives gathered to review the company's performance. My father, as a department head, was there. I, as a mere coordinator, was not. I was at my desk, trying to salvage an account that one of the old guard reps had nearly driven away, when Sarah pinged me on the chat. "Sarah, you might want to watch the live stream. Your uncle is on." I pulled up the internal company broadcast on a second monitor. My uncle, Robert Vance, the CEO, stood at the podium. Robert was everything my father was not. Where my father was rigid, loud, and dogmatic, my uncle was quiet, observant, and adaptable. He was a truly shrewd businessman who played his cards close to his chest. His relationship with my father was a constant source of office gossip. They were brothers-in-law, bound by the fragile threads of family, but in the world of business, they were like oil and water. "And finally," Robert said, his calm voice filling the silent auditorium as he clicked to a new slide on the giant screen behind him, "I want to highlight a particularly bright spot in what has been a challenging year for retention." The slide showed a graph with a dramatic upward curve. The title read, "Client Retention Rate Key Accounts." "Our overall client retention has been a challenge, as you all know," he continued. "However, one division has seen a remarkable, and I mean truly remarkable, turnaround. The Client Relations Department, under Richard's leadership, has posted a 37% improvement in client retention over the last 2 quarters. A polite, corporate applause rippled through the room. I felt a small, unfamiliar swell of pride. That was my work. Those were my numbers. I had almost single-handedly dragged that department's average up. I imagined my father at the head table, perhaps allowing himself a small, grudging smile of acknowledgement. The livestream camera panned briefly across the leadership team. It rested on my father for just a second, but it was long enough. There was no pride on his face, no smile. His face was like chiseled granite. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle jumped along his cheek. His eyes, fixed on my uncle, were burning with a cold, contained rage that was almost frightening. He wasn't proud. He was incandescently furious. He was furious that my uncle was publicly praising his department for results that were achieved using methods he loathed, methods he considered weak and unprofessional. In his mind, I had not only disobeyed his direct orders, I had now, through my success, made him look like a fool in front of his peers and his own brother-in-law. The fallout was swift and brutal. The very next morning, he called me into his office. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound that suddenly felt ominous. "That stunt you pulled," he started, his voice deceptively calm, which was always his most dangerous tone. "What stunt?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Getting Robert to praise your numbers in front of the entire leadership team. Going behind my back to make me look bad. I didn't do anything, Dad. I didn't even know he was going to mention it. Those are the real numbers. I thought you'd be pleased." He let out a short, bitter, humorless laugh. "Pleased? You're undermining my entire process. You're making this department ungovernable with your rogue operations. So, you think your way is so much better? You think your little chats about puppies and sick ants are some kind of magic bullet? He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to slits. Prove it. What do you mean, prove it? The numbers are the proof. No, he said, shaking his head. The numbers are tainted by your methods. I want a full audit. A comprehensive audit of every single client interaction you've had for the past year. I want every call, every email, every personal touch documented. And I want you to connect each one to a specific, direct, revenue-generating outcome. No more vague relationship building. I want hard data, dollars and cents. You have 1 month. It was a Herculean task. A punishment disguised as a professional assignment. He was burying me in work, setting me up to fail. He knew the data was there, but he thought the sheer volume of the task would crush me, or that I'd be unable to draw the direct, undeniable lines between a conversation about a dog and a renewed contract that his rigid mind demanded. Fine, I said, my own anger finally rising to meet his. I'll do it. For the next month, I barely saw daylight. I lived and breathed that audit. Sarah Chun, my quiet ally, saw what was happening. She'd often stay late, forgetting to go home, and would silently slide over to my desk to help me pull data, cross-reference reports, and format the mountain of spreadsheets. He's trying to bury you, Alex, she said one night, as we were surrounded by empty takeout containers and stacks of paper. I know, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. But he's going to fail. This audit became my singular obsession. It was the value proposition analysis I had already started, but now on a scale I had never imagined. I poured every ounce of my energy into it. And as I worked, the picture that emerged was even clearer and more powerful than I had hoped. I found an email chain where a casual, 2-minute conversation about a client's son's winning Little League game had directly led to them expanding their service package. A clean $40,000 increase in annual revenue. I found a call log where my remembering a small business owner's 5th anniversary had resulted in them prepaying for their entire next year's contract, significantly improving our cash flow for that quarter. I meticulously traced that single, infamous conversation about Mr. Henderson's dog to 3 separate, high-value referrals he had sent our way, totaling over $70,000 in new business. It was all there. While I was drowning in work, my brother Leo suddenly started acting like my biggest supporter. He'd stop by my desk, a look of deep concern etched on his face. Hey man, heard what Dad's putting you through. That's really rough. Are you holding up okay? I'm managing, I'd say, always a little suspicious of his sudden brotherly interest. Well, listen, he said one afternoon, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I know you're loyal, but you have options. I was talking to a buddy of mine, a top-tier headhunter, and I mentioned your situation. He said the market is incredibly hot right now for guys with your kind of skill set. You know, people with actual emotional intelligence. People who can connect. He slid a business card across my desk. Just saying, you don't have to take this crap forever. I glanced at the card and pushed it back toward him. Thanks, Leo, but I'm going to see this through. He shrugged, patting my shoulder with a theatrical sigh. All right, little brother, just looking out for you. What I didn't know was that Leo wasn't just looking out for me. He was actively, covertly trying to get me out of the company. He had taken a few key highlights from my work, the 37% retention stat, a glowing client testimonial I'd received, and passed them to his headhunter friend with a note. This guy is a star being held back by old-school management. See if you can find him a home. His logic was simple, selfish, and incredibly short-sighted. Get Alex a tempting offer from a competitor. Alex, fed up with Dad, leaves. The problem of his conflicting success is solved, and Leo's own path to a senior role is cleared of a potential rival. He thought he was lighting a harmless firecracker to scare me away. He had no idea he was actually lighting the fuse to a bomb that would blow up our entire family. A week before my audit deadline, I received a carefully worded message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman named Isabella Rivera, the CEO of a fast-growing competitor, Rivera Partners. Her name was well known in our industry. Her company was the one everyone was watching. The message was brief and direct. Alex, your reputation for innovative client management precedes you. I'd love to buy you a coffee and discuss your philosophy. No strings attached. Intrigued, and frankly in need of a break, I agreed. We met at a small, discreet coffee shop downtown. Isabella was everything my father wasn't. Dynamic, sharp, forward-thinking, and an incredible listener. She didn't talk about metrics. She talked about vision. We believe that in the age of total automation, the authentic human connection is the single most valuable and rarest commodity in business, she told me, her eyes sparkling with passion. What you're doing isn't sentimental nonsense, Alex. It's the future, and a lot of companies are too blind to see it. She made a soft, preliminary offer, a senior director position, a team to build from the ground up, complete autonomy, and she mentioned a salary range that made my jaw nearly hit the floor. As tempting as it was, my stubborn pride was still tied to Foster Analytics. Isabella, I'm genuinely honored, I said. Truly, but I have to see something through at my current company first. I have a point I need to prove. She smiled, a knowing, patient smile that made me feel like she understood more than I was saying. I get it. The offer stands, Alex. It's not going anywhere. When you're ready, my door is always open. That conversation lit a new fire under me. The final week of the audit was a caffeine-fueled blur. I finalized the report. It was 53 pages long. It was a masterpiece of data, narrative, and undeniable proof. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my methods had generated over $250,000 in direct, trackable additional revenue. It was ironclad. It was undeniable. It was my truth. The day before the big strategic planning meeting where I was scheduled to present my findings, I felt a surge of nervous adrenaline. This was it, the final showdown. I attached the 53-page PDF to a new email. I addressed it to my father. And then, in a move of strategic self-preservation, I CC'd my uncle Robert Vance. I wasn't just reporting to my manager anymore. I was reporting to the CEO. My father's reply came back in less than a minute. A single, chilling word. Received. My uncle's reply came an hour later. It was slightly more encouraging. Interesting report, Alex. Very thorough. Be prepared to discuss it at the strategy meeting tomorrow. I packed up my briefcase that night feeling like a modern-day gladiator heading into the Colosseum. I was armed with the truth, with facts and figures. I believed they would be my shield and my sword. I walked into the office the next morning ready for a fight. I just didn't realize my opponent had no intention of fighting fair. He had already decided to burn the entire arena to the ground. The morning of the strategy meeting, the atmosphere in the office was thick with a strange, static energy. It was unnervingly quiet. People in my department, people I talked to every day, were suddenly avoiding my eyes. Janet from accounting became intensely fascinated by a spreadsheet as I walked past. Tom from sales, who usually boomed a good morning across the cubes, just gave a curt, tight-lipped nod and scurried away towards the coffee machine. Something was wrong. My father emerged from his office at 9 a.m. sharp. He strode past my desk as if I were invisible, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He was carrying a single, thin file, not the thick binder I knew contained my meticulously printed report. A cold, heavy knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't right. Markham, a smarmy senior manager and one of my father's most loyal old guard cronies, swaggered past my desk a few minutes later. He paused, leaning in with a conspiratorial, mocking smirk. "Heard you wrote a novel, Foster," he sneered, his voice low. "Hope you're ready for the book review. I hear the critic is in a foul mood." He chuckled to himself and sauntered on, leaving me with a profound and sickening sense of dread. At 9:15, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from my father. The subject line was just 2 words. In all caps, urgent, department pre-meeting. The body of the email was even more concise. My office. Now, all hands. This was it. The ambush. He wasn't going to let me have my moment in the main strategy meeting with the CEO. He was going to try to discredit me, to cut me off at the knees in a smaller, more controlled setting first. A preemptive strike. I took a deep, shaky breath, straightened my tie, and pushed my chair back. My legs felt strangely heavy. As I walked towards his office at the end of the hall, I saw Brenda, his executive assistant of 15 years, at her desk. Brenda was a permanent fixture in the company. A quiet, kind woman who had seen everything, heard everything, and said nothing. She was the soul of discretion. As I passed, she looked up from her monitor, and her eyes met mine. They were filled with an expression I couldn't quite place at first. It wasn't anger or malice. It wasn't even curiosity. It was pity, a deep, sorrowful pity. That single look from her scared me more than Markham's sneering or my father's silence. It was a silent, desperate warning. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my father's office. The room was already packed. All 23 employees from the client relations department were crammed inside, standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, sitting on the small leather sofa, perched on the edge of the credenza. The air was thick and suffocating. It was completely silent. All eyes turned to me as I found a spot near the door, my back literally against the wall. My father was standing behind his large, imposing desk, his hands planted firmly on its polished surface. The large monitor on the wall behind him was on, mirroring his desktop screen. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice ringing with a false, chilling formality. "I've called this meeting to address a serious and pressing issue regarding our department's methodology and our core professional standards." He clicked his mouse. The cover page of my report, Value Proposition Analysis, filled the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. This was it. He was going to project it for everyone, pick it apart line by line, humiliate me with my own words. "I have spent the last 12 hours reviewing this document," he said, the word document dripping with contempt, "prepared by Alex Foster." He started scrolling through it, not stopping to read, not highlighting any specific point, just letting the pages fly by in a meaningless blur. 53 pages, he said, shaking his head with theatrical disbelief. 53 pages of anecdotal evidence, unprofessional emotional boundary violations, and frankly, sentimental drivel. He stopped the scroll and pointed a rigid finger at the screen. "He claims here that a 47-minute conversation about a man's dog is a revenue-generating activity. He claims that sending condolence cards is a strategic initiative. This is not business. This is a liability. It is a colossal waste of company time and resources. It sets a dangerous, inefficient precedent, and it ends now." My mouth went dry. I tried to form a word, any word of defense. I wanted to scream, "Look at the numbers. Look at the charts. Look at the $250,000 of revenue." But the sheer, stunning audacity of his attack, the public nature of it, the betrayal of it, stole the air from my lungs. I was paralyzed. The room was deathly quiet. My colleagues, the people I worked with every day, stared at their shoes, at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, anywhere but at me or at my father. He positioned his mouse cursor over the folder on his desktop where the report file was saved. The folder was labeled simply, "Alex's Audit." "This entire approach," he declared, his voice rising to a full-throated roar that seemed to shake the very glass of his office walls, "is garbage." He looked directly at me then, his eyes burning with a cruel, triumphant glint. He thought he had me. He thought he had won. And then he did something so petty, so destructive, so utterly final that it will be seared into my memory for as long as I live. He right-clicked the folder. The little white menu popped up. His cursor moved down, slowly, deliberately, like a guillotine being positioned, hovering over one single word. "Delete." My mind screamed, a silent, primal no. He clicked it. A confirmation box appeared on the screen, the last line of defense. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this folder and all its contents?" He looked at me one last time, a final twist of the knife, a final assertion of his absolute power over me. "Begin again," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, flat, devastating command. And he clicked yes. The folder vanished from the screen. Poof, gone. A year of my work. 53 pages of proof. Hundreds of hours of my life, my stress, my hope, erased in an instant, in front of everyone. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of a public execution. I stood there, frozen, the blood roaring in my ears like a freight train. I felt nothing and everything all at once. White-hot humiliation, ice-cold rage, and beneath it all, a strange, hollow, liberating clarity. And in that deafening, suffocating silence, a new sound emerged. A soft, digital chime. It was my phone vibrating in my pocket. It was a sound from another world, another life. Chimed again. A persistent, insistent buzz. Almost as if in a trance, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. The screen was lit up, a beacon in the dim, tense room. The name displayed on the screen felt like a lifeline thrown from a distant shore, from a future I hadn't yet dared to claim. Isabella Rivera. The world snapped back into sharp, painful focus. The stuffy office, the averted eyes of my cowed coworkers, the triumphant, ugly sneer on my father's face. It all became crystal clear. The debate was over. He had made his final, brutal closing argument. Now it was my turn to deliver the verdict. I stared down at my phone, the name Isabella Rivera glowing like a promise. Then I slowly lifted my head and looked directly at my father. The smug, self-satisfied look was still plastered on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had utterly broken me, put me back in my place like a misbehaving child. He had no idea he had just handed me the key to my own cage and opened the door. I accepted the call. "Isabella?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady and clear. The entire room was watching me, rapt, holding its collective breath. My father's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and annoyance. "Alex? I hope now isn't a bad time." Her voice came through, crisp and professional. "No, actually," I said, my eyes locked on my father's, refusing to look away. "Now is the perfect time." I deliberately turned my body slightly, giving my back to my father in a small but deeply satisfying act of defiance. I've been giving our conversation from last week some serious thought. I could hear Isabella's sharp, intelligent intake of breath on the other end of the line. "And?" she prompted. "And I'd like to discuss the details of your offer," I said, speaking loudly and clearly, making sure every single person in that silent, suffocating room could hear every word. The senior director role, the team leadership responsibilities, the equity options. All of it. My father's face, which I could see in my peripheral vision, went from confused to crimson in a heartbeat. "Alex, you hang up that phone right now," he commanded, his authority already sounding hollow and tinny. I ignored him as if he were a fly buzzing in the room. "I'm available to start immediately," I continued into the phone, projecting an aura of calm control I didn't know I possessed. "My resignation here at Foster Analytics is effective as of this moment." "That's fantastic news, Alex," Isabella said, and I could hear the genuine excitement in her voice. "Absolutely fantastic. We'll have HR draw up the official offer letter and send it over within the hour. 600,000 plus the full equity package we discussed. Welcome aboard. We are thrilled to have you." $600,000? Someone in the back of the room whispered audibly. The number hung in the air, a shocking, impossible figure that seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was more than my father made. "Thank you, Isabella," I said calmly. "I'll call you back in a few minutes to finalize the details." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket as if I did this every day. I turned slowly to face my father. The triumphant conqueror was gone. In his place was a sputtering, panicked, cornered man. His face had drained of all color, going from red to a sickly, pale white. "You can't do that," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You can't just quit. There are procedures. There's a contract. 2 weeks' notice. I think under these extraordinary circumstances, we can bypass the standard procedures," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "Willfully destroying an employee's work in a public forum, creating what any lawyer would define as a hostile and abusive work environment. I'm pretty sure that voids the 2-week notice clause in my contract. But don't worry, I added, letting the next words land with precision. I'll have my attorney review it this afternoon just to be sure. The word attorney seemed to land like a physical blow. It sucked the remaining air out of his lungs. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. He looked utterly lost. Just then, as if on cue, the office door swung open with force. It was my uncle, Robert Vance. He took one sweeping look at the scene. The terrified employees pressed against the walls, my father's ashen, shell-shocked face, my own stony, defiant composure, and his expression hardened into one of cold fury. He was no longer the affable CEO from the leadership summit. This was the man who ran a multi-million-dollar company, and he looked like he was ready to burn it down to save it. "What in God's name is going on in here?" he demanded, his voice quiet but carrying more raw authority than my father's shouts ever could. My father, seeing his brother-in-law, seemed to find a sliver of hope. "Robert, thank God. Alex he's trying to quit. He's going to our biggest competitor, Rivera Partners." He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "He's trying to blackmail us." Robert's piercing gaze shifted to me. It was unreadable, calculating. "Alex." Before I could speak a word, a small, hesitant voice piped up from the side. It was Brenda, my father's timid, long-suffering executive assistant. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was clear. "Mr. Vance," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Mr. Foster, he just deleted Alex's entire audit report. In front of all of us." Robert's eyes narrowed, locking onto my father. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You did what?" he asked, his voice dangerously, unnaturally low. "It was garbage," my father blurted out, his composure completely gone, replaced by a desperate, whining defensiveness. "It was unprofessional. I was teaching him a lesson in standards." "A lesson?" Robert's voice was now laced with pure, unadulterated contempt. "A lesson in what, Richard? How to destroy company assets. How to publicly humiliate our single highest-performing employee. How to personally gift-wrap our best talent and drive him directly into the arms of our most dangerous rival." He took a step closer to my father, who actually flinched. "Rivera Partners has been trying to poach Alex for 2 weeks. Isabella Rivera herself had the professional courtesy to give me a heads-up last week, leader to leader. She told me she was making him an offer he couldn't refuse because it was criminal that his talent was being so poorly managed here." Robert let out a bitter laugh. "I told her she was wrong. I told her this company, this family, recognizes and rewards its talent." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush the remaining hope in my father's eyes. "I was a fool to believe that. I was a fool to believe you could see past your own colossal, pathetic ego for 5 seconds. My father shrank under the weight of Robert's words. The entire department was witnessing the complete and utter public dismantling of a tyrant. Robert wasn't finished. He turned to the stunned employees. "This meeting is over. Everyone back to your desks. Now." The room emptied in seconds, people practically tripping over each other to escape. Then his eyes found David, the head of HR, who had been standing silently in the corner, his face a perfect mask of corporate horror. "David, my office. Now, we need to get ahead of the legal and financial fallout from this catastrophe." Finally, Robert's gaze landed back on my father. He looked at him not as a brother-in-law, not as family, but as a liability. A cancer on the company he had spent his life building. "You didn't just delete a file, Richard," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, devastating finality that was worse than any shout. "You just deleted the future of this department. And maybe, just maybe, you deleted your own." He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving my father standing alone behind his desk, a man utterly and completely defeated, not by some grand conspiracy, but by the swift and brutal consequences of his own arrogance. I watched him for a moment, This man who had held so much power, so much influence over my life. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked pathetic. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt nothing at all. I just turned, walked out of his office without a single backward glance, and went to pack up my desk. The war was over. I had won. Walking back to my cubicle felt surreal, like moving through water. The office, usually buzzing with the low hum of keyboards and phone calls, was dead silent. Every head was down, pretending to be absorbed in their work, but I could feel their eyes on me as I passed. Their faces, when I caught a glimpse, were a strange cocktail of awe, fear, and a newfound, grudging respect. I had done what none of them had ever dared to imagine. I had stood up to the tyrant, and the tyrant had crumbled. I found a small, empty cardboard box by the copy machine and began to pack my personal belongings. It wasn't much. A few books on business strategy, a framed picture of my scruffy terrier, a well-used coffee mug that said, "World's okayest employee," the mundane artifacts of a life I was already leaving behind. It didn't take long. I realized with a pang of sadness that I hadn't ever allowed myself to put down many roots here. Sarah Chun came over to my desk, her movements hesitant. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Alex, I can't believe you did that. That was legendary." "I can't believe he did what he did," I corrected her gently, offering a small, tired smile. "He gave me no choice." She nodded, understanding. Then, she glanced around quickly before slipping a small, black USB stick onto my desk, covering it with her hand for a moment. "A little insurance policy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I made a full backup of your report last night before I left. Figured he might try to pull something shady. Just in case." She squeezed my arm, a gesture of solidarity that meant the world to me in that moment. "Good luck, Alex. You deserve all of it." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." I slipped the USB stick into my pocket. Felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just data anymore. It was proof. It was vindication. It was a friend's loyalty. As I was taping up the box, David from HR approached me, holding a tablet and wearing a pained, professional expression. "Alex," he said, his tone careful and neutral, "I just need you to sign the exit paperwork. For the record, we've officially documented your resignation as a result of a hostile work environment claim. The company will not be contesting your immediate departure, and per Robert Vance's instructions, we'll be paying out the remainder of your contract in full, along with your accrued vacation time." I scrawled my name where he indicated. It was over. Official. Final. I took one last look around the office. It already felt like a place I used to know, a chapter in a book that was already finished. I picked up my box and walked towards the main exit. I had to pass my father's office one last time. He was standing in the doorway, as if waiting for me, blocking my path. And my mother was there, too. She must have broken every speed limit in the city to get there after his panicked call. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Alex, please," she began the moment she saw me, her voice pleading and desperate. "Don't do this. Stop and think for a minute. Think about the family. Think about what this will do to all of us." "I am thinking about the family, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I stopped a few feet from them, refusing to be drawn into their circle of drama. "I'm thinking about the part of the family that just publicly humiliated me and attempted to destroy my career over a bruised ego." "He didn't mean it like that," she insisted, a line I had heard 1,000 times before. He was under a lot of pressure. You know how he gets. He loves you, deep down." I let my gaze drift from her to my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the plush carpet, a disgraced king, a man who had lost his kingdom and his son in the same 10-minute span. "Love," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "That wasn't love in that room, Mom. That wasn't pressure. That was control. That was pure, unfiltered fear. And I'm done with it." I shifted the box in my arms. "I have to go. I have a new job to start." "Alex, wait." My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse and broken. We can fix this. I can talk to Robert. I can double your salary. Triple it. Whatever you want. The offer was so pathetic, so stunningly tone-deaf, that I almost laughed out loud. Proved he still didn't understand. He still thought it was about money. This was never about the money, Dad. You, of all people, should know that. I took a step to the side, intending to walk around him. He moved again, a clumsy, desperate shuffle to block my path. What about us, then? What about our relationship? I stopped and looked him dead in the eye for the first time since I'd walked out of his office. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to see the vast, empty abyss that had opened up between us. Our professional relationship, I said, each word a carefully placed, perfectly polished stone, is over. As for our personal one, it's on life support. And today, you were the one who pulled the plug. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I walked past him, past my sobbing mother, through the gleaming glass doors of Foster Analytics, and out into the bright, indifferent afternoon sunshine. I didn't look back. I put my small box of belongings in the trunk of my car, got into the driver's seat, and took out my phone. I dialed Isabella Rivera's number. Alex, she answered on the first ring. Is everything okay? Everything is perfect, I said, and I felt a real, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time that day. It felt like coming up for air after being held underwater for a year. I've officially left the building. Let's talk about that offer. We spent the next 20 minutes on the phone as I drove away, hammering out the final details. I wasn't just a coordinator or even a senior manager. My new title was Director of Partnership Development. It was a senior leadership role. The salary was real. The equity was real. My future was real. As I hung up the phone and merged onto the highway, I felt a profound, bone-deep sense of release. It wasn't just about the new job or the money. It was the feeling of taking back the narrative. My father had spent my entire life trying to write my story for me, casting me as the disappointing supporting character in his own grand play. Today, I had taken the pen out of his hand, and I was about to write a whole new chapter, one where I was the hero. My first few weeks at Rivera Partners were a whirlwind, but a good one. It was like stepping out of a black and white movie into glorious Technicolor. The office was buzzing with energy, not tension. People collaborated in open spaces. Ideas were scribbled on whiteboards, and laughter echoed in the hallways. Where Foster Analytics was built on fear and a rigid, top-down hierarchy, Rivera Partners was built on collaboration, innovation, and trust. My personal touch philosophy wasn't just tolerated here. It was celebrated. It was the core of the company's official training program. Isabella Rivera didn't want robots. She wanted passionate, engaged people. About a month into my new role, the first significant tremor hit my old company. I was in a strategy session with Isabella and my new team, brainstorming ways to innovate our client outreach. My phone buzzed with an email from Isabella's executive assistant. The subject line was just a single name, Evelyn Reed. My heart skipped a beat. Evelyn Reed's company was a massive account, representing a solid 15% of Foster Analytics' annual revenue. I opened the email. It was a forwarded message from Mrs. Reed herself, sent directly to my Uncle Robert's office and now, apparently, making the rounds. The email was a formal, no-nonsense notice. She was exercising the 30-day termination clause in her contract with Foster Analytics, effective immediately, citing a fundamental loss of confidence in senior management and their strategic direction. In the final, devastating paragraph, she announced that her company would be moving its entire portfolio of business to Rivera Partners, specifically to be managed under my new department. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. I hadn't solicited her. I hadn't made a single call or sent a single email. I had respected my non-compete clause to the absolute letter. This was simply the first natural consequence. A validation. I could almost picture the sheer, unadulterated panic erupting in the Foster Analytics boardroom. The loss of that single, massive account would be a devastating blow, not just to their bottom line, but to their reputation in the industry. It was the first domino to fall, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. 2 months later, the second, more personal domino fell. I got a call on my direct line. It was Mr. Henderson. "Alex, my boy." His cheerful, booming voice came through the phone. "Heard you moved on up in the world. Good for you. Knew you were too smart for that old place." "Mr. Henderson, it's great to hear from you," I said, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. "How's Buddy doing?" "He's great. A little slower on the stairs these days, but he's still chasing squirrels with the heart of a lion," he chuckled. "Listen, Alex, the reason I'm calling is that my contract with your old company is up for renewal next month. And to be perfectly honest, the service has gone straight down the toilet since you left." He went on to describe a disastrous lunch meeting he'd had with my father, who had personally and desperately tried to retain his business. "He just doesn't get it, son," Mr. Henderson said with a heavy sigh. "He spent the whole time talking about maximizing ROI and optimizing our data funnels. He sounded like a computer program. He never once asked me how my business was doing, let alone how Buddy was. He just saw me as a number he was about to lose." He chuckled again, a dry, humorless sound. "Long story short, I'm not renewing. Send me over one of your contracts. I'd rather do business with a person than a damn spreadsheet." And so it went. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic exodus. It was a slow, painful, methodical bleed. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. As other contracts I had nurtured came up for renewal over the next 6 months, they were lost one by one. Clients I had built genuine relationships with for a year were choosing to follow the relationship, not the brand name. The story from each of them was depressingly similar. My father or his old guard managers would try to retain them using the old, cold, impersonal methods, and they would fail spectacularly. They didn't understand that the loyalty wasn't to Foster Analytics. The loyalty was to the person who remembered their kid's name, who asked about their sick dog, who treated them like a valued human being. 6 months after my departure, the news I knew was coming finally broke in a major industry trade publication. The headline read, "Foster Analytics announces major restructuring, lays off 30% of staff amidst financial crisis." The article cited significant, unexpected client attrition over the past 2 quarters as the primary cause. I read the article in my new, spacious corner office at Rivera Partners, an office with a view of the entire city. That same day, Isabella had officially promoted me to senior partner. My phone rang as I was staring out the window. The caller ID said, "Mom." I let it go to voicemail, but she called right back. I sighed and answered, "Alex, did you see the news?" Her voice was strained, on the verge of tears. "I saw it, Mom. Your father, he's a wreck. He's a broken man. They're blaming him for everything. They're talking about forcing him out. Leo's job might be on the line in these layoffs. The company is falling apart." Her voice cracked. "You have to do something. Please, call your old clients. Tell them to go back. You're the only one they'll listen to." The request was so audacious, so completely and utterly divorced from reality, that I was speechless for a moment. They had publicly humiliated me, tried to ruin me, and pushed me out, and now they wanted me to come back and clean up the catastrophic mess they had made. "I can't do that, Mom," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Why not?" she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "This is your family. This is your father. He did what he did because he was scared. Don't you see that?" "Scared of what?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. "Scared of you," she blurted out, the words tumbling out in a torrent of confession and desperation. "He saw how good you were, how easily it all came to you. He saw the clients connecting with you in a way they never, ever connected with him. He's been doing this job for 30 years, Alex, the exact same way, and you came in and showed him in less than a year that his way was obsolete. Terrified him. It broke his brain. He wasn't trying to hurt you. He was trying to protect himself, his own fragile ego." The confession hung in the air between us. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. But for the first time, it felt like the unvarnished truth. This whole saga wasn't about principles or business efficiency. It was about the simple, pathetic, mortal fear of a man who realized the world had moved on without him, and that his own son was leading the charge. "I'm sorry he was scared, Mom," I said finally, the words tasting strange and foreign. "I truly am. But his fear doesn't excuse his actions. And it's not my job to fix the damage that he caused." I ended the call, feeling a strange, quiet sense of closure. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. This whole saga wasn't a grand tragedy about the fall of a family business. It was an intimate character study of a man whose pride and fear led him to destroy the very thing he was trying to protect. And my role in his story was, at long last, finally over. It's been a little over a year now since I walked out of Foster Analytics for the last time. As a company, it no longer exists. After months of hemorrhaging clients and spiraling into debt, what was left of it was acquired by a larger national competitor for pennies on the dollar. A fire sale. My father was forced into an early, unceremonious, and bitter retirement. My brother, Leo, true to form, was deemed redundant and let go during the merger. He sends me an angry, blame-filled text message every now and then, usually late at night. I never reply. There's nothing left to say. My relationship with my parents is distant. It's the polite, strained truce of a Cold War. We speak on holidays and birthdays. The calls are short, superficial, and pregnant with all the things we'll never say to each other. My mother still tries to broker a peace that was never really there to begin with. My father rarely speaks at all. The chasm that opened up in his office that day may never be bridged. And I've finally come to accept that some things, once broken, can't be put back together again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the concept of revenge. About the primal, satisfying fantasy of watching the man who tried to break you lose everything he holds dear. But when I'm being honest with myself, the most satisfying part of this whole journey wasn't his downfall. It was my own ascent. True revenge wasn't some elaborate, calculated scheme. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of choosing to believe in my own worth when he refused to. It was the daily act of coming into a job where I was valued, respected, and not just permitted, but encouraged to be myself. It was in the staggering success of Rivera Partners, which, in the last year, has become the undisputed industry leader, built on the very principles of authentic human connection that he once publicly branded as garbage. My success was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. I learned that I didn't need to tear down his house. I just needed to build my own, on a stronger, more honest foundation. I learned that your value is not, and can never be, determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is forged in fire and pressure, in the moments you decide to see it in yourself, even when you're standing completely and utterly alone. My father deleted a file, but he couldn't delete my worth. That was the one thing he never, ever had the power to do. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to bet on yourself against all odds? I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.